This is the GoPro Hero 13. What I want to cover on today's video is what I feel like the best settings are for underwater use in order to capture the highest quality footage right here in camera. That way you can take it straight from the water directly to social media without having to worry about doing a whole lot of work in post-processing. So I don't want to waste too much more of your time. Let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, of course, after turning the camera on is swipe down from the top of the screen, push over to the right, and we're going to want to go to the controls menu and change it from easy to pro. This is going to give us access to the more advanced features that we're going to want to have control over. So simply open up that controls menu, take that slider and push it up to pro. Then we're going to go back to the main screen, and now we're going to get started setting up our first preset. You'll see here right at the bottom of the screen where it says video, go ahead and open that up. You'll notice that there's already two profiles set up already. One is going to be for burst slow motion, we'll cover that later. And the top one just says video, and this is pretty much going to be GoPro's baked in video preset. So before we create new presets, we're going to start by just working out of this one. So right at the bat on the top of the screen, you can see these three different options here. We have log, HDR, and standard. Log is going to be GoPro's in-house log profile, also known as GP log. This is going to require color correction and post-processing. And to be completely honest, this is how you're going to get the best results, but it does require the most work in post. You also see that there's HDR, which is going to be a high dynamic range profile. And you only want to use this when there's ample light. You never want to try to use this in low light. And to be completely honest, even under those circumstances, it looks like absolute crap. So I typically try to avoid HDR mode, but we're going to go ahead and set it to standard, which is going to give us great results without having to do a whole lot of work in post. Scrolling down, you can see that we have our different framing options from 16:9 to 9:16 if you want to go ahead and post vertical, maybe for TikTok or Instagram. There's also 4:3 and 8:7, which is going to be more of a square-shaped aspect ratio. And what this essentially does, it allows you to decide after the fact whether or not you want to frame your image horizontally or frame it vertically. Just keep in mind, this option does limit you in resolution as well as slow motion options. But we're going to go ahead and set ours to 16:9. Moving down to resolution, we're going to skip right past 4K, and I'm going to set mine to 5.3K. This way, in case I wanted to crop into the image a little bit further as an afterthought, I'll be able to maintain that higher resolution. Going down to frame rate, I'm going to set mine at 60. That way I can slow my footage down to about 50% in case I wanted to get a little bit of a slow motion effect. Going down to the digital lens option, you have linear plus, linear, wide, super view, hyper view. Linear plus pretty much means linear plus horizon leveling, meaning that the horizon will stay level even as the camera rolls back and forth. On this camera, you can even rotate it a full 360 degrees and the horizon will still stay level. It's almost like a gimbal. In this case, horizon leveling only works with linear unless you use one of these aftermarket lenses. Now, my personal favorite is super view because when I'm shooting underwater, I love that wide angle look. Hyper view, in my opinion, is going to be way too wide for underwater use because you can see how there's this ugly chromatic aberration along with an excessive amount of distortion. As you can see, the image really kind of breaks apart around the outside edges. Looking at hyper smooth, let's go ahead and set that to on. And then the capture menu, I pretty much leave alone. Moving down to Pro Tune, let's go ahead and switch bit depth from 8 to 10 bit. This is going to give us a little bit more flexibility in case we do end up wanting to make some changes in post. When it comes to bitrate, let's also change that from standard to high. But keep in mind, when this is set at high, it's going to use up more space on your SD card, and it's also going to cause your GoPro to run a little bit more hot, but I haven't noticed that to be an issue yet on the Hero 13. Now, looking at shutter speed, in order to get a cinematic looking motion blur, the general rule of thumb is to have a shutter speed that's double that of your frame rate. In this case, we're shooting at 5.3K at 60 frames a second, so you would typically want to set your shutter speed to be 1/120. However, we're not going to do that in this case because GoPros have a fixed aperture which is pretty wide open, and even if your ISO is at 100, in a lot of cases your image is still going to come out to be overexposed. So that's why we're going to set it at auto. Usually you'll be able to use ND filters to compensate for this, but in this case our GoPro is either going to be underwater to where you can't remove the front lens, or it's going to be locked up in the underwater housing to where you also can't remove the front lens. And although GoPro makes amazing ND filters, we're simply just not going to be able to use them underwater, and that's why on this specific preset, we're going to set our shutter speed at auto. Now down the road, when we set up the presets for slow motion, we're going to be using higher frame rates, which means that we can use the faster shutter speeds, and in turn we'll have a lower risk of overexposing our image. But moving down to EV comp, and this is kind of important because With these GoPros, I've always noticed that they do tend to be overexposed. So what we're going to do is we're going to change your EV comp to -1. With older GoPros, I used to set it at -0.5. But for some reason, the Hero 13 has a tendency to be quite a bit more overexposed than others. White balance, I'm going to leave it at auto. ISO minimum, we're going to put that at 100. And going down to ISO maximum, I'm going to set this at 800. Now sharpness, if you leave it in high, it's going to look terrible. So I'm going to go ahead and push mine down to medium. Low is acceptable if you do plan on doing a lot of post-processing work, because it's going to look much better if you push that sharpness up in Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve. But if our plans are to take this straight from camera to social media, let's go ahead and set it at medium. With denoise, go ahead and switch that to high if you find yourself in some sort of low light environment, but otherwise just go ahead and keep that at medium. Now looking at color, you're gonna see 3 different options here: vibrant, natural, and flat. Now with flat, this is gonna be very similar to shooting in the log profile, to where you're gonna wanna do a lot of post-processing work, but you will get best results with this setting. Vibrant is gonna be way too saturated, but since we're trying to get the best results in camera without having to do a lot of work in post, I'm gonna set mine to natural. And of course with the audio menu, I'm just gonna leave all that alone. We're gonna leave the dashboard option off, and I'm gonna go ahead and leave the shortcuts menu alone as well. This is pretty much all we need to do here for this one specific preset. If we scroll all the way back up to the top of the screen and then hit the back arrow, it's pretty much gonna save those settings that we just punched in here. So that's going to be your first color profile, shooting at 5.3K at 60 frames a second. Before setting up our next one, let's take a look at some of the example footage. Now the next profile that we're going to set up is going to be slow motion, and we're going to start with 120 frames a second. Go ahead and hit your video profile at the bottom of the screen, and then go all the way down to the bottom where it says create new preset. Select that option. We're going to go ahead and hit video. We're going to keep the standard option. We're going to want 16:9, and because this is 120 frames a second, we are going to have to downres to 4K. Be sure to select 120. And for the lens option, I'm going to go with Super View again. And of course, we're going to have Hyper Smooth on. Scrolling all the way down to Pro Tune, we are going to want to select 10-bit as our bit depth. And then for bit rate, we're going to go ahead and set it to high. Now for shutter speed, since we're shooting at a frame rate of 120 frames a second, let's go ahead and set our shutter speed to 1/240, which is going to give us the most cinematic looking motion blur once we're able to slow down our footage to the desired speed. Because on this preset we have a fixed shutter speed, it completely disabled the EV comp option. Now because we have a fixed shutter speed, let's be sure to set up our ISO to auto. Sharpness, I'm going to leave it medium, but because ISO is set to auto, if we happen to go into a low light situation, it may bump it up to an unusually high rate. And for this reason, I'm going to set denoise to high. Color, of course, we're going to leave it natural. Everything else is pretty much going to stay the same. So now what we're going to do is hit the check mark, and you'll notice that it says create custom name, which is unlike the other GoPros. The 13 actually allows you to name these different presets whatever you want to, and I'm pretty excited about that. So I'm going to name mine after the frame rate, which is 120. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and set up another preset. This time it's going to be for 240 frames a second. So we're pretty much going to do the exact same thing here. So I'm going to run through this one a lot quicker. We're going to start by drilling into the video presets at the bottom of the screen, go all the way down to where it says create new preset, hit that option right there, select video, hit the check mark. So now of course we're going to stick with standard. We're going to stay with 16:9 as the aspect ratio. And then for resolution, we're going to have to downres to 2.7K. So go ahead and select 2.7K. As soon as you do that, you'll see that the 240 option now lights up. So we're going to select 240 frames a second. For digital lens, W is the widest option in this case. So we're going to go ahead and stay with the wide. Scrolling on down, of course, Hyper Smooth is going to be on. Now looking at ProTune, because we're at 240 frames a second, you'll see that 8-bit is the only option, but we're going to go ahead and set our bitrate to high. The shutter speed in this case, since we're shooting at 240 frames a second, we're going to go ahead and set the shutter speed to 1/480. This shutter speed is going to give us the most desired results once we slow down our footage. Just like on the last one, ISO minimum and ISO maximum are going to be auto, sharpness is going to be medium, denoise is going to be high, and then color is going to be natural. So now we're going to go to the check mark, we're going to go down to create custom name, and just like last time, I'm going to name this preset after the frame rate. So in this case, I'm going to name it 240. So I bet you're wondering, how are you going to be able to switch to these different presets when your camera's inside the underwater housing and you don't have access to the touchscreen? So here's a little bit of a hack that not a whole lot of people know about. What you're going to do is hit the side button in unison with the record button. And it's going to bring up the list of all the different presets that we just set up. You're going to be able to cycle through those by hitting the side button. And then when you land on one that you want to use, you simply just hit the top button and it's going to select that preset, giving you access to those settings. And that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover on this video, so thanks again for hanging out this long. If anything, I hope that you found this video useful, and of course, for your viewing pleasure, please enjoy the rest of this underwater footage. Thanks for hanging out this long, and I hope you found this video useful. I do want to mention that I have no affiliation with GoPro whatsoever, but if you want to watch my full review and underwater test of this camera, I'll go ahead and link this video right here. And of course, I'll see you on the next dive. Thanks for watching.